Just as you might expect, on the stroke of the time we're due to start, the phone rang. And obviously I've got to be unmuted, so I've got rid of it. Welcome everybody. It's our first summer. It's not been without its challenges to get this far, and I want to thank all those who worked so hard to make it happen. We are currently, on my list, at least over 100 participants, which I think is a record. So we're all creating history for the CCS today. So it's a new meeting and a new record attendance, and it's still going up. It's my pleasure to introduce Michael Grant. We've known each other for 25 years, and we've held similar careers in some respects from various companies, etc. But we work closely together, in particular with the livery company. And I was master in 2008. He was the clerk. And then in 2005, I was BCS president. And now, of course, Michael is immediate past president. So we've come together in the industry over a long time. I have a lot of respect for him, and he's a brilliant speaker. So I propose to shut up, hand over to Michael, and enjoy his talk. Michael, over to you.
Michael does need to unmute.
How about that?
Well done, Michael. Away you go.
Great. Thank you for that marvelous setup, David. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be today. Thank you so much for inviting me to address you today. I hope very much you're going to feel the same at the end of the session. For those of you that are familiar with the BCS meetings, this is going to be just a little bit different. And for me, I guess it's a little bit like stepping into the confession box. Over the next 60 minutes, I'd really like to kind of take you through my career journey of working with 6 IT supplier corporations and my world of volunteering alongside the IT industry. I hasten to add, as my children keep reminding me, none of these companies exist today. And as I like to remind them, it's really important to know when to join, but much, much more importantly, actually, when you should leave. And I'm happy to say, before I get any questions, I did manage to leave all of them well before their demise. This particular fact that they no longer exist might be helpful today, because it means that I no longer have to worry about all my non-disclosure letters that I've signed over the years. So you might just get to hear some anecdotes you probably shouldn't hear. And certainly I'm going to be introducing some of the turbulence that I've seen in the IT industry throughout my career. And hopefully I'm going to give you a bit of a glimpse at some of the amazing people that I've been lucky enough to work with and so on. And hopefully you'll get a bit of a laugh at watching me grow up, or should I probably say getting a little bit older. Perhaps above all, you might care to tell your children about some of the lessons that I've learned, in the hope that others may find them useful and helpful in their lives. To be frank, I didn't really have the most perfect start in life. My father was actually Australian, and he was an RAF in the RAF, and he was a corporal. He served in Burma and India and so on, but sadly died just a few minutes or few hours, I think it probably was, after I arrived in the world. I was just a few weeks old. I spent my early days with my widowed mother, who was very poor, and we lived actually in my grandmother's house in a council house down in Kent. Life was tough, and I mention this not for anybody's sympathy, not that I get any, but to illustrate the fact that that recently emerged from some BCS research, and I hope you all are aware of the fact that the IT profession enables social mobility far greater than any other profession in the UK, as I hope perhaps my career will prove to some degree or another. Well, life took a pretty dramatic turn for me at the age of 7.5, when the RAF Benevolent Fund actually sent me to an English cathedral boarding school. I was going to boast that, of course, it was in Rochester and very old, founded in 604. But I understand there are 2 people from King's Canterbury here who beat it by 1 year in 603. So yeah, that blew that one away, didn't it? It was the embodiment, really, of Tom Brown's school days. It had to toughen me up, and I did need toughening up. And I often sought refuge in the little tuck shop on the left. But basically, I became a child of charity. And with that, of course, I developed a huge social conscience and responsibility to try and pay back into the world and into society as a volunteer. It also, of course, taught me just how incredibly important it is that every child has the best education that can possibly be available, wherever you are, whatever your background, and whatever your circumstances. And that began, if you like, my passion for education, as you'll hear. Unlike virtually everybody else that went to King's Rochester, who either became a professional or went to Oxbridge or something, I didn't. There were some financial reasons for that, and probably, if I'm honest, also some academic reasons as well. But I joined a company that will be familiar to you all, I'm sure, H.J. Heinz, the beans, means people and the tomato ketchup folks. And I joined as what in those days was called a management trainee. But, of course, the modern equivalent is really that of an apprenticeship. My first boss was a great guy, Tony O'Reilly, that some of you may have come across. He played rugby for Ireland whilst he was still the MD of that company. But you'll understand now why I have an immense pride in the remarkable work by the BCS, which supports and drives the whole digital apprenticeships program. There are over 10,000 digital apprenticeships, which the BCS are now managing. And of course, you will have heard some bad stories about apprenticeships because they haven't perhaps all worked out in all areas, but digital apprenticeships are going absolute gangbusters. I suppose really my strong social conscience kicked in pretty early on in my career. As well as running my local youth club at weekends, I joined the Territorial Army, or as it's now called, the Reserve Army. My wife loves this. She's never seen me work so hard in my entire life. So at the age of 19, I decided to go and do my bit for Queen and Country. And by extraordinary luck, this actually helped me later on in my career and to enter the field of technology. I always remember the first day I was in the Honourable Artillery Company as a recruit, the company sergeant major screaming at me, "Never ever volunteer for anything in the services." And I'm delighted to say I've certainly proved to myself, and hopefully some others, what a load of old bunkum that is. I went on to actually be a young reserve officer there, and how volunteering really changed and I believe inspired my whole future career path. Well, life unfortunately took another bad turn around here. In fact, rather an unpleasant one. And when I was 21, my mother died of what they described as a broken heart, having lost her husband in the RAF, and she actually took her own life. This was not a good experience, as you can imagine, and I think quite wisely at the time decided that I needed to go and do something to get my head back together. So I left Heinz with much regret because they were just the most wonderful outfit, and I decided to go and recover by traveling overland around the world. And this, believe it or not, was in the days when no sensible Brit would ever dream of doing anything like it. So, of course, my companions really turned out to be mainly draft dodgers and, of course, the rather occasional attractive young Swede. But in this picture, yes, I'm afraid it is me on the bottom right, wearing the pajamas. I'd run out of money at that stage and actually had to sell all of my clothes. And I still can't believe that eventually they let me go into Australia like that. I had very little money, obviously, as an apprentice. In fact, I didn't really have any. But I managed to buy a bus ticket, believe it or not, from Kingston railway station to Delhi railway station. And of course, I had to live off my wits. Local transport was an absolute no-no in those days. And so here was my bus, Sorry, it's back to front. It is 50 years old, this picture, so I'm a bit amazed I've even got it. But I enjoyed the cultures, the people, and of course I spent time in some fantastic places. Turkey, when absolutely nobody ever went there. I got to Iran during the time of not the Ayatollah. I actually got arrested for this picture. It's a group of Muslim women who are doing their washing up of their kitchen utensils in an open road drain. And then I went on to Afghanistan, where I got hospitalized in Kandahar, which of course is now the center of the Taliban movement. But in those days, actually, it was truly wonderful. And I got to discover Afghanistan even before the Russians knew where it was. I went over the Khyber Pass and gradually worked my way onto Australia, where, of course, I had to earn enough money to get myself back to the UK. So I worked on farms, and I also worked for a bit in Perth, which was great. It doesn't look anything like that in the days when I was there. And I caught a ship all the way back via New Zealand, Tahiti, Panama, Venezuela, and all those wonderful places. At the time I bought my ticket, I hadn't realized I'd booked myself into a cabin with 5 other people that I'd never met in my life. There were no portholes, and it was 18 inches above the prop shaft. So I spent most of my time on deck. But this incredible experience, even though it came about by very unfortunate circumstances, left me with a passion for an international career. And of course, that helped me set my sights on my first real job, I guess, in the field of technology. I wonder how many of you can remember the first person who ever gave you a break in your career. I can. Mine was Harry Hall, the chap on the right here, who was the personnel manager of a company called Redifon Flight Simulation. It's based down in Crawley. It was a multi-million-pound engineering and IT genius company selling to the world's airlines and the world's military. And by great deal of fortune and good luck, I rose from being the personal recruitment junior to a marketing manager over the next 6 years. The products were a STEM dream. A combination of 6-axis motion systems to the very early CGI, computer-generated image systems, digital sound systems, all driven in those days by a mere 10 digital PDP-11 computers. I wonder how many of you remember those. My job really was to develop the promotional material, set up the exhibitions at Paris and Farnborough air shows and that sort of stuff. And I did a lot of international PR work and PR briefings. As I try to say to students that I talk to these days, every young person needs to make that break into a company which is either going to hang them or help them to survive. And I was incredibly lucky with Redifon Flight Simulation. I started to meet some kind of interesting people early on in my career. This is a chap called Barry Goldwater, which some of you may remember was the US Defense Minister. And I worked with delegations from China and Russia. Sometimes I'd even be doing a factory tour where I had to hide a Russian general from an American general in the factory at the same time. So it was certainly a launch into an extraordinary world of technology and of great internationalized backgrounds. One of my first worldwide launches was for an aircraft called the AWACS. That's the aircraft that flies up there. It's an old 707 with a mushroom on the top. And I, to my immense surprise, was given the role of actually doing the launch of this aircraft. And I gathered a whole load of international technology press people, and we flew it down from Boeing Field in Seattle down to Tinker Air Force Base. In those days, probably only about a third of the aircraft was covered in computers. But I hasten to add, even then, you could see every single aircraft that was in the air across 6 of the American states. These days, of course, it's stuffed full of much more sophisticated material, and you can actually look beyond the shores of America, and you can see flights taking off all over the place. This experience really was the beginning of my multiple visits to the US. Redifon bought into a company called the Evans and Sutherland Computer Corporation. Amazing company run by David Evans and his partner up in Salt Lake City. They were world leaders in those early CGI systems. And as a young man, I was, again, quite extraordinarily given a role of lobbying a Pentagon general and dealing with senators in the defense area to try and steal all of the flight simulation contracts from the American competitor Singer and the Canadian competitor CAE. So this is really, I guess, when I began a bit of a love affair with the United States, and I remain today, in spite of everything, a keen ambassador for them. I well remember at Redifon my first video conference, which I'm going to mention quickly because, of course, today, and particularly because of the COVID situation, this is a part of everyday life. But I used to have to hire satellite time. That was £15,000 for any booking of any nature. I had to pay for my projector hire and my engineer another £7,000 per hour. And of course, the maximum time that I could actually run a conference was some 25 minutes whilst the satellite went over the top. So I'm feeling, in spite of all of the different types of video conferencing today, pretty cool about it, as it doesn't seem to cost me a penny. Well, after 6 years with Redifon, it was kind of time really for me to move on. I hadn't actually intended, and I suspect there are a few people listening in now, I hadn't intended to join the computer industry at all. And I decided to answer this advert here purely because I hadn't been for an interview of 6 years. And as I try again to tell students, if you don't take a chance in life, you're never going to know what you've actually missed. The job was much less money than I'd been used to, but the people were utterly fantastic. And I found myself eventually bamboozled by Malcolm Bedina, I know that some of you know, into joining this US-based, very young startup. It was in the super mini market. And unbeknown to me, I'd actually made a wiser choice than I would ever have known or realized. They were the blue-eyed boys of the New York Stock Exchange. And I suddenly discovered the great benefits of share schemes and so on, half of which in my life made me some money, and in the other half of my life lost me some money. But there we go. So for the second time in my life, I found that I joined an amazing company. And I try and explain to young people again that in their early careers, it's really worth moving around, because once you find something that you love and you're passionate at, you're going to be good at it and you're going to be successful. I ran my first kickoff, which for those that are not familiar with the term is the sales meeting. And this was for the European members of Prime Computer. And I had as my guest motivational speaker a chap that many of you will recognize, of course, the late Sterling Moss. And he at the time was the world racing car driver. And this was the car in which he gained that title in those early days. I'm dressed as a cop. You're probably wondering why, but some of you might even remember that wonderful old TV ad where this racy driver turned up at the traffic lights, and the cop made him turn his window down and said, "I suppose you're blooming Sterling Moss." So it doesn't make much sense 50 years after the event, but and it wasn't the last time. Of course, I actually ended up working with Sterling, as you'll hear later. Well, things actually went much better than I'd expected or indeed deserved. And the board of Prime Computer had come over from the States, and I ran my first ever kickoff dinner in one of the city livery companies, which was before I was a member or really knew anything about them. And anyway, the Americans were impressed, which was all that mattered in those days. and I ended up on the President's Council, and thus began another very unexpected and enormously luck-filled 6-year career for me, that really gave both me and my family a life beyond my wildest dreams. And I hope that there are other people sitting on this call who've had the same sort of experience of joining something and never realizing just how lucky we really were. My first global launch with this company, Prime Computer, actually took place in a marquee in the gardens of a French chateau. And it was for the what we call the Prime Super Mini 2250. In the morning, we flew in some 500 customers from around Europe. God, these were the days, weren't they? I mean, I'm sure it could never be like this again. And then in the afternoon, we flew in a further 200 international press. I hasten to add, of course, the French journalists were always too lazy to actually get in their car and drive down. So I ended up hiring 10 helicopters, only to find that my brand new boss from America had been in Vietnam and totally freaked out as it woke him up from his jet lag, thinking he was under attack. But that's another story for another day. We actually did. It was really quite ingenious. We did simultaneous shows. So there was a show in the marquee with live members of the team and so on, and live demonstrations. And simultaneously, back in the Boston-based headquarters, there was another team moving at the same pace, at the same time, saying the same words and so on. And the whole idea, of course, was that this was the early days of packet switching. And we were going to demonstrate to the world how incredibly easy with a Prime Computer it was to pass some information out of a tent in France and get it arriving in Boston in seconds later. I, of course, being a typical cynic, didn't believe it would work. And I well remember hiring, I think, a bank of 52 35mm projectors, which would make it look as though it was going to work even when it didn't. But to my complete amazement, it worked first time and it worked the second time. And the demonstrations went off exceedingly well. Everything was going great until I was doing a Q&A with the customers at the end when somebody stood up, needless to say, a banker, and accused me of cheating and said, "This is impossible. This can't work this well and this quickly." And he passed a piece of paper up to me. To my horror, giving me the password into his bank in New York and asking us to do this live. I looked at the chief technical guy who looked almost as white as I'd gone by that time. And anyway, I can't believe it. It worked. It went through. And of course, it made that company in Europe in front of those customers like forever, because this was clearly a great company with some great products. Well, I bumped into my American boss, who was based in the UK at the time. For those of you that are ex-Prime, it was Peter Jenish. And he explained to me from the Paris office on a Wednesday that I was due to start work for him in Boston the following Monday. Oh, my goodness me, how mad was the industry in those days? And of course, I hasten to add, I learned a lesson: never give up without trying a challenge in life. And duly, I did find myself in Boston the next Monday, but it was quite a challenge because I had a wife and 3 children, including one young Down syndrome son. But it worked, and it was great, and it was a fantastic experience, and I was so very, very lucky. My first US-based IT show was actually in Los Angeles. And Mike Newton, this is an anecdote especially for you. I was just putting the finishing touches to my stand, and I looked across the corridor, and there was a chap really struggling to put his stand up. And so obviously I went and helped him out. At the end of the show, he came up to me and he said, well, Michael, thanks for your help earlier on. By the way, this is basically the launch of my company. And tonight I'm going to run a Tex-Mex wonderful event in a canyon just a few miles away. Oh, and also, by the way, You're one of the lucky 300 people because I've hired Disneyland from 10 o'clock tonight till 4 o'clock the next morning. And he introduced himself, of course, as Steve Jobs. The first time I met Steve Jobs, and that was the actual launch of Apple. There you go, Mike. I tell you, I got an anecdote for you. Anyway, I continued with Prime doing my kickoff product launches and my sales meetings in Dallas and Los Angeles and Atlanta and so on. And of course, in those days, we were giving away our software for free. Anything, anywhere, just to push the hardware and to put a bit of metal under somebody's office. I also had a lot of fun because I got, again, by probably mistake, an opportunity to make the industry's first computer TV adverts. They were actually for a guy called Lionel Singer, who ran Prime in Australia. And for one reason or another, I think it was probably largely labor union problems, I found myself making these on his behalf in some funny little studio in London, working with no less than a Doctor Who, Tom Baker, one of the early doctors, and his beautiful assistant Lala. I did actually at one stage during the shoot catch Tom Baker, Doctor Who, kissing Lala around the back, so I was particularly pleased when I later learned that they actually got married. And by the way, if you look on YouTube now, you will find each and every one of those original fun TV ads for the first computers to be televised. Well, you know, life's like this, isn't it? All good things come to an end sooner or later. And I basically, a lot of IBMers, no offense here, David Morris, basically took over the main jobs running Prime Computer in the States. You know, it's the usual old kick out of the old founders go and the new team moves in as the company matures. And I basically decided, because my sponsor over there was one of those kicked out at the very senior level, so I decided to return to the UK as the marketing director for a short while. I did go on actually to join a Boston-based PR and advertising agency, and I started working with Wang. Now there's a blast from the past, isn't it? Of course, the world's leading word processing experts at that particular time. But this, for me, was a very special time for something entirely different. It was a remarkable volunteer opportunity that appeared, and it more than made up for my disappointment, perhaps, of returning back to Europe from the US. I had a colleague in the US who was looking after the Wang account over there, and he called me one day and he said, "Michael, I've got a niece. Unfortunately, she's dying of leukemia, but she's passionate to make her first visit to the United Kingdom, and she loves horse riding. Help." So my assistant and I sat down, and we got more and more brave. As every time we found that we asked anybody to do anything for this little girl, they said yes. And I got onto the King's Troop, and they gave her a special ride on the horses in Hyde Park. Got onto Princess Anne, and she took her riding, and it was just an extraordinary experience. And unbeknown to me, actually the mother, well, unfortunately the little girl died about 2 weeks after she got back to America, but the mum wrote a book all about the experience. And I received an extraordinary phone call from somebody called Emma Sands. For those of you that used to watch television, she was a star of Dynasty, and she had apparently read the book and said, "Look, Michael, I want you to be one of the 4 founders of this charity called the Starlight Children's Foundation over here in the UK." It was an extraordinary experience. This was all about granting wishes and providing some basic technology to terminally and critically ill children, and very often granting them wishes. And because of my network in the industry in Europe, I used to get all of the families and the children that wanted to go and visit Paris. But strangely enough, they all wanted in those days to go to Paris. And I found that I could pick up the telephone to any company based in Paris, usually, of course, a subsidiary of an American company. And I could say to them, will you please pay for them to go on the Bateau Mouche for dinner? Will you pay for them to do this, do that, etc.? And I would drive over and drive the family around. And it was just such an incredible experience for me to see how fantastically kind and generous our industry could be all those years ago, to look at people that have severe challenges in life. I was very lucky. I completed some 15 years working with that charity, and I'm still very keen to follow them and help whenever I can. And it was a massive privilege to touch the hearts of so many needy families, and of course to see the bright, wonderful side that our industry actually can be. Well, I mentioned I'd gone on and I joined this US advertising and PR agency. They went by the wonderful name of Hill, Holiday, Connors and Cosmopolis. It could be only in America, really. Now, of course, what you probably don't know is that particular company took both Lotus Development and Wang from literally being garage businesses to global multi-million-dollar companies. And of course, it was driven by an extraordinary and very extensive ad budgets and PR budgets and events that we ran around the world. My chief client for Wang in Europe was their marketing director, a chap by the name of Ken Alyssa, which might ring a few bells, and who actually turned out to be quite an important part of my future career. And this was serious money. I never ever thought I'd be doing this sort of stuff, but I had 22 million pounds of an advertising budget to launch a product that I don't think anybody ever actually bought, the Office Assistant, and we went heavily once again into TV advertising and running major events across Europe. I'm going to tell you one confession coming up here. I was a little bit crazy in those days, and of course Wang brought out the fastest possible word processor that could ever be anywhere in the world, and I sat down and I dreamt up this crazy thing. I think I'll take all of the journalists and some of the customers up on a train to Alton Towers, and I developed. I found a fantastic photographer. I built a special area where I could get a great picture for the press the next day. And you'll notice that I even got sort of limpet things to fix these computers on the front of this particular ride. It didn't all go according to plan. First of all, when we got on our 2 private carriages in London on the train, oh, by the way, I had also paid the train driver a big wodge of used notes to try and make it a record journey up to Manchester. Which he did, actually. He did earn his money on that. Unfortunately, I had Sterling Moss with me as well. Obviously, my objective was that Sterling would sit in the front of this wonderful contraption here, and he would be holding an umbrella and a bowler hat in order that everybody would see that every businessman everywhere around Europe should be buying a Wang, the latest, fastest Wang word processor. Regrettably, Sterling took one look at this and said, "Over my dead body, am I getting in the front there?" My client, Ken Alyssa, looked at me and said, "Stupid man, your idea, get in, do it." And even worse was the fact that the photographer simply couldn't get the picture. And on the second go-round, of course, I was the only moron who stayed in it because everybody else piled off after each round. After the second one, I had to stop the train, get off, and be a little bit ill. On the following 6 rounds, I had to stop the train on every single occasion, get off and be ill. And I never forgave Sterling for that, but he was extremely pleased that he'd been smart to make me do it. So there's sort of one of the confessions of a rather overzealous marketing director. I went on to do a number of factory openings in Scotland and various other places for Wang. I always remember this one. His Royal Highness Prince Charles was opening the factory, and I handed over to him one of these wonderful, brand new off the manufacturing line Wang word processors, and he took one look at it and he said, Michael, not quite sure what to do with this. I'm sure you can find a home for this, and passed it straight back to me. Of course, it ended up in the Starlight office within minutes, as you can imagine. We did fantastic global product launches from Brussels, where we would stick an audience of 500 people on a rotund, and we would spin them round to watch different sequences on different stages. I can't believe I ever got the money to do these things, but it was great fun. And I did meet on a number of occasions, of course, Dr. Wang and his family. And one particular instance always comes back to mind. Sadly, I had arranged for the doctor to come over to the UK and meet with Matthew. I can't remember his surname, but he was the technical correspondent for the Financial Times. And that night, the bottom had fallen out of Wang, almost completely and utterly. And as I sat in front of the journalist, the first question was, well, Dr. Wang, how does it feel to be worth £50 million less this morning than you were last night? And of course, I leant across to the doctor, trying to think very quickly a suitable answer for the journalist. And the doctor just looked at me in his wonderful, inscrutable way, and said, "Don't worry, Michael. I know how to answer this." And he looked Matthew right in the eyes and he said, "Matthew, when I arrived in America, I and my family had a mere $100 in my bank account. In fact, I didn't even have a bank account. I had greased up notes in my thing. So do you really think that I'm too worried about losing a few million? No." And of course, we got a great write-up, and instead of being killed in the Financial Times the next day, Matthew saw that this was a real super guy. There was, of course, however, a side to the Wang story, which I suspect not too many people know about. And that was the fact that the doctor wanted to hand over the leadership of his company to his son, Fred Wang. Now, in Hill Holiday, Connors and Cosmopolis, we knew this was not going to work because there was a fantastic CEO by the name of John Cunningham who would have made a much better job. And anyway, after I'd moved on from Hill Holiday, they took on Fred to try and lick him into shape with a year in business. And lo and behold, unfortunately, they did put Wang under through nepotism, of course, under the wing of Fred Wang. And we all know what happened there, don't we? So by then, thank goodness, I'd moved on. I had moved on to a very interesting company, which I suspect will prick the ears up of a number of you. In the mid-'80s, I joined ICL. I joined them actually at the request of their new president of International, who happened by chance to be an ex-country manager from Sweden with Prime Computer. And of course, my job, having done super minis and so on, was to assist ICL in moving away from the dependency of their amazing mainframes and into the field of departmental systems. I couldn't believe my luck, actually, because the first week of working for ICL, I bet nobody, this never happened to anybody else, I got sent to Florida, where I went on a course, the Phil Crosby quality course. And one of my roles in my new job was to run that out across the world. I took quite a substantial drop in salary, but it proved to be, in my experience, the very best investor of people in the IT industry that I had certainly come across. And I've been well used to being sucked dry, if you like, by my American past employers. And this was like a bolt of lightning and fresh air, where people wanted to invest in me, give me personal development, and really a very, very professional team indeed. I did more sort of dramatic product launches. We launched something called the All-in-One, and maybe if any of that team are there, the Andy Roberts, the Bernard Humes, the Nigel Hartnells, the Mike Forrests, etc., will well remember that. It was a spectacular event. I managed to persuade a castle to hand over virtually everything they had, and we had a great time, and actually a very good product launch. But I can't honestly say an awful lot of people bought the All-in-One, and certainly not as many as I would have liked. I ran another event. One of the challenges of ICL at that time, as of course I worked for the international guy, was to try and get people to think of ICL not just being a UK company. And I came up with this completely stupid idea that we would hold the senior management meeting, instead of being down at Putney or somewhere, we would hold it in Brussels. So I hired one of the sort of the Brussels venues, and I had a favorite French customer, who lived in a beautiful castle overlooking the Loire, and all of his stables contained 4 or 5 ICL mainframe computers, and it had the largest database anywhere in the country. And I decided that I was going to ask my friend, who didn't speak a word of English, to open my conference for the first 10 minutes without any simultaneous translation. I can remember the look on the faces of the senior management team, realizing that, oh no, it doesn't all happen in the UK, and a little bit of business does go on elsewhere in the world. It was, I worked with an incredible team of country managers. The ICL country managers were like nothing I don't think I'd ever come across anywhere else. They were a very highly professional team. Some of you will probably recognize people like Alan here, and John Proctor, and chaps from South Africa and Australia, and myself. Oh God, I can't believe I actually wore Gucci shoes in those days. Oh dear. But a wonderful team, and we ran actually I think the first events ever in Hungary and the Czech Republic and Poland, because of course my American competitors weren't allowed to do business there. So it was a fantastic heyday for ICL. And but I did, however, learn 2 very serious lessons at this stage. Probably the biggest lesson of my life. My boss, the international president, I knew he would run every morning at 6:30 with his wife through Ascot, and he was very fit, and that he'd had a fabulous yacht out in Sweden, and he would go through those thousands of islands in incredibly dangerous weather. So I thought, this is a man who can show himself up with his country managers, and we can build the team that he wanted, and the camaraderie, and you know, this is going to be great. So I did probably the worst thing I ever did in my life. I decided to take all of the international management team up to Scotland on a John Ridgway course. Now, John Ridgway was one of those chaps he'd rowed the Atlantic, he'd sailed his yacht round, single-handed around the world and so on. This was clearly not going to work. I remember meeting the international team off a rickety old bus as they had to blast their way through the heather to a series of kayaks and canoes, which John Ridgway insisted they paddled with lots of spray and wind coming off the water for 3 miles up to the log cabin. These, of course, were people who had come in from Australia and Japan and America. Many of them had been traveling for well over 25 hours. And it was a bit of a wake-up call. I should have known at that moment this was not going to work. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the first thing that went wrong was we all arrived a little wet just outside the log cabin after this rather wet kayaking ride. And John Ridgway called out, stop, everybody stop, about 20 meters off the little island he was on. And he said, I just want to, see how good and strong and determined you each are. And he pointed to my boss, whom we'll call Tomo. And he said, I'd like you to invert your kayak, please. And whilst your head is under the water, I'd like you to tap 3 times on the top of your canoe. Tomo instantly said, over my dead body, at which stage, of course, the Australian shot his hand up and said, oh, I'll do it. And then it became a competition thereon in on every single of those 3 days, on every single horrific thing that John Ridgway asked us to do. The country managers grew to be the closest team I could ever imagine, but would never, ever even talk again to their boss. Oh, dangerous time for me. My boss strangely enough, left. I'm sorry, that's my phone. I won't answer it, and I hope it'll go away. My boss left to go and work and help run a company called Symbol Technologies in America. And I have to say, the second lesson I learned was when I basically, the last I heard of him was when his lawyer stood up in a New York court and said he had allegedly been accused of removing £5 million from this company. But my client, he said, was certainly not in the United States any longer and would never, ever, ever be returning. And to this very day, I believe the FBI are still looking for him in the Balkans. So I learned a lesson. I thought I knew somebody really well, a good colleague, and boy, oh boy, I certainly didn't. So, as you can imagine, I joined the first tranche of redundancies from ICL. Actually, I was probably pretty lucky to have been made redundant after that terrible blunder of the John Ridgway event. But like in life, and hopefully in many of your careers, the minute one door shuts, another door opens up. My work with Starlight had really become more and more challenging as I continued to travel more and more. But then something really special, which David Morris referred to earlier on in the introduction, which was really about to change my volunteering life. My old client from Wang, Ken Alyssa, persuaded me to join an extraordinary organization called the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists. This is actually the 110th city livery company. And of course, like all of these other livery companies, it supports the IT industry and profession, and it does huge amount of work in the training and the education field, and spends a lot of its time with this particular livery company, taking the time and talent of its members and doing wonderful charitable works through IT. It's today it's about 800 of probably some of the most successful people in the IT industry. They range from entrepreneurs, founders of Logica, Oracle, IT lawyers, CIOs, IT consultants, and almost every component of our industry that you could imagine. But, and the wonderful thing about it is, and was then, that every single person was on payback into society, all of us having been very lucky in our IT careers and determined to do something to say thank you for that. There are today, I think, 19 different panels that the members give their time and talent towards and as part of their payback into society. And they range from through IT, helping the homeless, helping people with disabilities, children's hospices. And I decided to join the education panel, the communications panel, and the employment panels, all of which actually I still participate in. My sponsor, by the way, was Ken Alyssa, who, of course, is, in fact, a past vice president of the BCS. And today he is Sir Ken Alyssa, quoted as the most powerful black man in the UK. Although when I worked with him, I must admit, I never actually noticed. And I love this picture because somebody clearly is not amused at all in the joke that is no doubt being done between Ken and Prince Andrew there. Ken today, of course, as many of you will know, escorts Her Majesty and other members of the royal family as the Lord Lieutenant of Greater London. So watch for him on your tellies because he'll always be there. Anyway, at that stage, I moved on and I joined a newly formed international marketing team with, yes, guess what? Commodore. Is there anybody on this call who hasn't got a Commodore product in their roof somewhere? Now, I know that you've already heard one of the Commodore stories, and you've had some very good, positive things. But now I haven't got my disclosure letter to worry about. I'm going to show you perhaps another side for a few moments. It was a bit of a mixed experience at Commodore for me, one has to remember, of course, that as a company, it had the most brilliant early grasp of consumer electronics. And it really was an incredible trailblazer. And my role when I joined them, together with this team, well, this was the first international marketing team that Commodore had ever had. And our role was to introduce the first Commodore PC and those amazing Amiga products, those early graphics programs and products that, of course, basically founded the whole of the games industry. And this was my first sight into the games industry. And I personally believe it is a massive opportunity for both the BCS and also for the livery company, because I would like to see those organizations bringing in new realms of ethics, professionalism to this hugely, hugely important, fast developing market, of which, of course, the UK is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the very best anywhere in the world. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? Its demise was its top management and its unbelievably extraordinary culture. This marketing team, who actually were some of the brightest people I'd ever come across anywhere in the industry, on our first meeting with the CEO and the founder was called Irving Gould, and the CEO in those days was called Mehdi Ali. And I remember we'd all, rehearsed our words, and we'd got a fabulous strategy set out for the next 5 years and so on. And we all just flew into New York to present it. And Peter Bailey here in the middle, whom some of you may well know, stood up, and his opening words, well, now, Mehdi and Irving, can we please go through the marketing strategy for the next 5 years? At which stage Mehdi Ali jumped out of his chair and said, don't you ever dare use the term marketing strategy again. Oh, bit of a problem, as you might imagine. I think after that meeting, everybody bar me immediately put out their CVs. And in fact, each of these people went on to do some quite amazing jobs elsewhere in the industry. Why except me? Well, I jumped on the plane and came back home, and I took a call that night from Mehdi Ali. And Mehdi reminded me that the first Gulf War had just started, and he actually needed me to drive a major product introduction for the world's first interactive TV. I found myself yet again trying to introduce a product 10 years before it was really ready. The world was ready for it. And he said to me, I want you to work Monday, Tuesday at your European job. Wednesday, I want to see you every Wednesday in the office in New York in Fifth Avenue, which, by the way, was decorated with real elephant skin wallpaper. And then on Thursday and Friday, I want you to alternate each week. You can go to the Westchester, Pennsylvania factory, and then the next week you can go over to Los Angeles and sort out this product launch. It was an extraordinary time for me. I didn't know whether I was coming or going from one week to the next. But I did earn a lot of British Airways miles on Concorde every week, so I guess I shouldn't really complain too much. It took me a few years to work them off as well. But there was an upside to this, because the person that we were putting as our front man in the United States for the major launch was none other than the inventor of the first computer game, a most lovely, delightful man called Nolan Bushnell. I'm sure we all remember playing ping pong. Well, of course, that was his first game, and he was the founder of a company called Atari. Today, if you've got grandchildren or kids over there, you may have been into one of his many restaurants with fantastic animation characters which serve all the children in his restaurant chain called Chuck E. Cheese. But he was the most lovely man, absolutely delight to work with. And I certainly remember the largest press conference I think I've ever come across in my life. 600 journalists squashed into this rather small hall, being opened up with this delightful man, Nolan Bushnell. He is, of course, a multi-billionaire. He now lives in Aspen, and was one of the nicest people I think I've really ever met and had the pleasure of working with. You would never have known he was a multi-billionaire, just a super guy. Well, as life again would have it happen, as I arrived back in the United Kingdom after this incredible product launch, I received another call from Mediali informing me that I was being laid off. So I found myself for the second time in my career being made redundant. But as life would have it, it took a right turn for me again, because none other than my ex-head of the Commodore marketing team was a marketing manager at Lotus Development. And as soon as I landed, he phoned me up and he said, right, you're coming straight over to Lotus Development. And the lesson, of course, I learned here was you've got to be jolly careful in life, particularly in the IT industry, because you never know who your next boss is going to be. So make friends, not enemies. Make friends, not enemies. That certainly stood me in a good case there. This company, Lotus Development, had one of the most fabulous cultures and one of the most professional companies, again, that I had ever worked for. My job was to lead a team of 30 marketeurs out of beautiful downtown Slough. And what I think woke me up to realize this was a company with a difference was the very first question that I was asked in my interview was, and tell me, Michael, what have you ever done for anybody else? And he wasn't talking about work. It was, what sort of person are you? And this was a company that matched employee contributions for charity. They were fantastic fundraisers. It was an extraordinary culture of a very, and it was the same, the culture was the same whether you were in Europe, anywhere around the world, or in America. Very, very special. My first job was to launch good old Lotus Notes. And I did it with a company called PictureTel, which many of you may remember. It was a very early video conference company. It didn't cost me quite as much to run a video conference across the States and do a worldwide launch as it had done with my Redifon flight simulation days. And I had a great time there. I mean, we ran fantastic sales kickoffs for 1,000 employees. We went to Vienna, we went to Cyprus. It had a camaraderie, and it had a startup mode and culture way into its maturity. I was spending basically two days a week on an airplane trying to get around 3 countries and being somewhere else. It was, you know, as you've heard me say before, all good things, of course, come to an end. And Lotus, as you will be well aware, was taken over by IBM. Not having another go here, David, I promise you. And unfortunately, of course, my wonderful product of Lotus Notes and a couple of others met their ill-fated demise. The vice president of Europe and his 5 directors, of which I was one, were made redundant again. Can you believe 3 times? But incidentally, the VP, I've got to tell this, I hope I don't get into trouble for this, but the VP for Europe, who was an absolutely super guy, really wonderful manager, wonderful man to work for, went off to work for Alan Sugar. 3 days later, he decided to run and go and find a job elsewhere. I can't imagine the culture that Alan Sugar would have had in his operation compared to that of which Lotus had, ever managing to survive anywhere. Anyway, at that stage, I took a short interim role as the CEO of an organization called FAST, which some of you may know. It was very impressive, actually. It was sponsored by Microsoft, and of course, it was the Federation Against Software Theft. And I had a very interesting time basically policing and protecting some of the world's best software products on behalf of the software industry. I was shocked, by the way, when I introduced a sneak telephone line to discover that there were many companies and even government departments that actually were not paying their proper licenses and were really screwing the industry, the software industry. And in fact, the very first call I ever took on the sneak line was a bit shocked, I must admit, was a Royal Air Force squadron leader telling me that none of the software being used at his station had ever had licenses paid for. Anyway, as luck would have it, I moved on from here and I was headhunted into my final corporate role. This was with an extraordinary company called Gateway. Many of you might actually still have Gateway computers. It was the first time that I met rampant ageism. However, I was 48 years old when I joined Gateway, and it was only after I joined that I discovered that the average age of the entire 1,100 people that were at the call centre and customer support centre in Dublin was actually 25 years old. And well, I hope it was affectionately, but I discovered after my first week that I was affectionately known as Mr. Zimmerman. But luckily for me, I really enjoyed working with younger people. And it was an extraordinary company. I mean, Gateway Computers, I mean, I had to move to Dublin because at 48, as a international marketing director, there weren't too many roles around. But I loved it. I loved Dublin. I loved the people that I was working with. And as an international call center, it was quite extraordinary. I remember I wanted to open up in Sweden, and I was able to pick up a phone and ring the education department and say that in 18 months' time, I wanted to hire people in my Dublin establishment that were good Swedish speakers. And I had a call within 20 minutes from the education minister. He said, "How many do you want? And what date do you need them?" And blow me down, when we opened in Sweden, I had the most extraordinary group of Irish people who all spoke excellent Swedish, none of whom had ever actually been to the country. And opening this in Stockholm, I asked one of the journalists to make a call into the call center, and there was a conversation in Swedish which I didn't understand, but I could see there were some mutterings and some strange looking faces around. They couldn't actually work out exactly which part of Sweden the individual had come from. But when I told them that they were Irish and that they'd never been to Sweden, that shows you the sort of caliber of people that you could employ in Ireland, and the sort of lengths that the Irish government would go to make sure that having a facility in the Republic was a really, really smart move. Well, it also, for me, it was the very first time in my entire career that I actually knew which customers I had, where they were based, and exactly what they bought from me. This, for me, was a fantastic data bonanza. And I'd learnt at Lotus Development the importance of good customer data, and I'd worked quite extensively. Gosh, I can't remember their names now, but they were the people that sort of opened up the Tesco data bank and so on. And I can remember making a visit to Ted Waite in Sioux City. My first visit to Sioux City, by the way, was kind of interesting. We stepped out of a little 8-seater airplane, which you'd caught up in Chicago. And the minute the door opened, there was this unbelievably awful smell, to which I must have gasped or something. And the person behind me said, "Well, if you come to Sioux City, you're either working for Gateway or you're skinning hogs. Which one are you?" And this was an extraordinary company. It was run by Ted Waite, who was a farmer's son, very bright. But I do remember having a really difficult meeting with him, explaining to him that he was sitting on a gold mine, and that if he didn't go dig in the gold mine, Dell certainly would, and that the data that he held was absolutely priceless. Unfortunately, either I didn't do a convincing enough argument or whatever, and Dell, of course, won the battle, as you well know. But it was a lovely company. I really enjoyed working with the Irish. Incidentally, I had to open the same factory for the second time. I'd opened it many years earlier on behalf of Prime, and it was our manufacturing unit, and I had to open it yet again for Gateway. I used the same sort of a T-shirt to do the thing, and the same reception in Malahide Castle and so on. Very small world. It was difficult breaking into the German market, and the other thing that amused me was, of course, when I arrived there, I had to buy an entirely new wardrobe because everybody looked to me as though they were on Friday dress down. So I no longer wore a tie or a jacket or anything. And even if I was taking the American ambassador out for dinner that night, he knew I wasn't allowed to wear a jacket or a tie, and he would roll up looking the same to the restaurant. And what I didn't know at the time was that Fridays really were dressed down, and it was basically shorts and a ripped T-shirt. I'm happy to say I never succumbed to that one. But it was tough selling to corporates with a corporate with a Frisian cow as your emblem, and all of the packaging going into the corporates were Frisian cows. And certainly with Germany, I learned very quickly that direct marketing was a major issue for them, and we ended up actually opening up showrooms in both Paris, London, and Germany, so that people could touch and feel and kick the product, which they then, of course, ordered through Ireland, because Gateway wasn't paying any tax in the countries concerned, and that, of course, was their demise. I well remember the day when I had some family circumstances which required that I no longer lived in Ireland. And I remember getting a call from the Inland Revenue asking me about the process for ordering computers from Gateway, and blow me down, 3 months later, they closed the whole of the Dublin operation, laying off over 1,100 people. So there's a lesson for those companies in our industry that decide they don't want to pay tax in the countries where it should be paid. Whilst I worked for Gateway, I've been very lucky. I found myself being asked to chair a lot of conferences in America and in Eastern Europe, and occasionally in the UK, for this company called Bapti. And I'd really enjoyed it, and of course it gave me, in the channel marketing area, probably the best database there ever was. So when I came back from Ireland, trying to find a job at over 50 was absolutely impossible as an international marketer. And I realized I'd come to a stage in my life where I had to start my own company. So I set up what was actually a very small international headhunting recruitment company with no capital, and I worked from home. And I loved it. It was very successful. I made many new friends and greatly increased, of course, my network in the industry. And I wish to goodness that I'd actually done it 10 years earlier. It was far more successful from a financial standpoint than anything I'd ever earned in the corporate world. And it really was a lesson in my life to perhaps be to have been more brave earlier and to have started my own consultancy. And the fact that I loved it and made more money, of course, I never dreamt would have been possible. So I nowadays try and encourage everybody when they get to the 50 mark to seriously consider about starting their own outfit. Well, I had 5 years of running my own fun recruitment company, and then it came to an abrupt halt. Because I entered what I would really describe as my pro bono career, and which was kind of either working for a minimum or at least no remuneration at all. But it did prove to me just as exciting and rewarding as my corporate IT career, although it did, of course, put quite a lot of financial pressure on you. So I became what's called the clerk, or the CEO, as David mentioned earlier, of that wonderful, worshipful company of information technologists. I found that I was flooded with a number of calls when the previous clerk left, and I think I was almost coerced into taking the job on, for which I never had any regrets whatsoever. Of course, bearing in mind these are all people on payback into society. Once again, I was meeting and mixing on a day-by-day basis with some of the nicest folk you could ever find anywhere in the world in our business. And as volunteers, of course, for my job as the clerk or the CEO, whatever you want to call it, it was a little bit like trying to persuade 800 chiefs to work very much like charity Indians. We raised, in those early days, £1 million out of the members to build the Hammersmith Academy School, which was an IT new media school. Brilliant, fantastic, a very needy area. It wasn't the smart part of Hammersmith. It was really Goldhawk Road, a very depressed area where they really needed a great school. And I'm happy to say that school has gone from strength to strength, has really good Ofsted ratings, and is made up mainly of minority group students. We also worked for a number of years in turning another school around called the Lillian Baylis School, which was based, again, in a really tough area of London in Lambeth. And we helped them get new buildings. We got it renamed, if you like, as an IT school with fantastic turnaround Ofsted results. And I guess it founded my passion for working in education, which greatly influenced my future sort of volunteering roles. Well, the livery company, I suppose, was a bit of a rarefied lifestyle, but the role of clerk enabled me to get to know a number of my IT heroes, I guess. As clerk, you had to perform certain ceremonies from time to time, and some of those were to give, if you like, the freedom of our livery company. So the first one was this fabulous guy, Vince Cerf, whom I'm sure you all know, one of the founders of the internet. I think his card at the moment working for Google says internet guru. A wonderful, delightful man, fantastic communicator. I could point a camera at him and say, please, Vin, give me some words for the kids at our Lillian Baylis School or our Hammersmith Academy. And he would come out with the most wonderful motivational words, which would hopefully drive many of the kids to consider future careers in the IT business. I think, I can't remember whether Vink came Surf or whether this was my next ceremony. And this, of course, is Sir Tim Berners-Lee. I must tell you a quick story about Tim. Tim was quite difficult to track down, and he had actually, in this ceremony, I had to unroll a parchment, and he had to read from it words which sort of were sort of almost written in an Old English form. And I didn't hear anything from him till he was on his way in a cab from Heathrow to come to the livery hall in the city, and he rang me. He said, "God, Michael, I've just read your words. What's all this stuff? You know, I've got to obey the master and do whatever the master says." And he said, "I don't know who the master is. I don't know who the future ones are going to be. I'm having a little bit of a difficulty with this." Well, who was I to put Sir Tim Berners-Lee off having the freedom of our livery company? No way. So I got out the yellow sticky tape, and I put it on my parchment that I had to roll out across those vital words. And to my immense relief, nobody ever noticed that I had taken, oh, I can see David's face. He didn't know that I'd taken the words out. So we continue to have a great relationship and a lovely guy. I obviously in the livery company, I met lots and lots of Lord Mayors. This actually is the last Lord Mayor who opened the brand new BCS offices in London. Oh, and by the way, I'm the first visitor apparently to the brand new BCS offices here in Swindon, which is very good news. I also met through the livery company Buzz Armstrong, and one of my great favourites, whom I'm sure you all know, Dame Stephanie Shirley, who became my mentor when I was a clerk, and continues. And of course, Steve was a past president of the BCS as well, a quite remarkable lady. And of course, I got to know the city people quite well, the sheriffs, the aldermen, and we continue to have good relationships, both with the BCS and the livery company, with all of those. Uh, I tried to retire. My retirement party was what we call it was the day that we were granted a royal charter with Prince Edward there, and all sorts of pomp and ceremony with services in St. Paul's Cathedral, and marching down with the Lord Mayor's private bodyguard to the Mansion House for great banquets and so on. You might have noticed a rather strange little picture here. I appear to be carrying a pizza box, and maybe I should explain why. There was, you're not going to believe this, but there was apparently a parchment shortage in the United Kingdom at the time of our needing to have a parchment scroll with our royal charter on it. And I can remember going down to the Privy Council office the day before and saying to them, please, how's the parchment doing? They said, Michael, you've got to come back later in the day. We just might have your charter ready, but meanwhile, you better work on the basis that you may not have one. And I know you've got His Royal Highness there and, all the pomp and ceremony. So you're going to have to pretend that you've actually got the Royal Charter. So we came up with this pizza box idea. And I had to explain to His Royal Highness that it was going to stay in the pizza box on the basis that we didn't want any superfluous wine or dripping from the plates ending up on it. So anyway, to cut a long story short, we had a wonderful royal charter, and I went back to see my family in Pittsburgh in America, and where I received a phone call to announce that I hadn't retired. And by the way, would I mind doing another 3 years service for the livery company, during which, like David Morris, and I hope several other people who are in on this, the incredible privilege of becoming a master of that livery company. It was, of course, great training being master of a livery company for my role when I was appointed president of the British Computer Society, and chairing all those court and charity board meetings, and acting as an ambassador for the IT industry, and meeting, of course, a lot of the influential leaders was great. I thought I knew everything about setting up and helping schools at that stage, so it led to my future volunteering roles in education, where of course I discovered I knew nothing about education whatsoever, and much of my life was spent basically going to training courses to understand, let alone that I thought in the military I had a difficult language, in the IT industry we had a difficult language. Oh, it doesn't even compare to the gobbledygook they speak in the education area. So lots of time at a fairly advanced time in my life learning lots of super stuff. I decided actually to join a very badly failing school in an old garrison town in Borden in Hampshire. And I'm so pleased I did, because of course I learned very quickly, and this was one of the great occasions when I would encourage everybody everywhere to become a school governor, because you can literally change the lives of so many people, particularly if you go to a poor school in a poor area, where you can help turn it around and to make the future careers and lives of these kids. Today, this went on a little bit further, and I'm actually a trustee of 15 schools now, which are part of the Chichester University Academies Trust. And this one, I'm really pleased. We opened just a few weeks ago, is our brand new secondary school in Borden. We turned it round. It was like at the bottom of the league in Ofsted, and now we turned it round in a very short time to become a great school. You'll be pleased to hear I'm nearly there, folks. Hang on in, only a couple more minutes. It was a very satisfying 5 years as a governor, and I really recommend it to everybody. One of the nice things about changing lives of people is that, for example, I've now got 5,000 young people and 250 teachers, and we are making huge headways with all of these schools. And the BCS, of course, has this hugely successful record in the education area. just in case you thought that my volunteering life was coming to an end, it wasn't. Just a few months ago, I joined this extraordinary movement, really, I guess it is. They're called the Positive Transformation Initiative. And you'll notice up there that our chairman, yet again, once more in my life, Sir Kenneth Alyssa, comes into play. And this is all about looking at the lives of people who haven't had a great start in life, whether you be from a poor, depressed area with bad education, whether you be somebody, you know, an ex-veteran or an ex-offender. And I'm really thrilled to say that nearly 50% of the people in this organization are all with IT backgrounds at very, very senior positions. And the rest of them are all legal general counsels of some of the largest companies in the world. This, you're going to see and hear a lot more about PTI in the future. It doesn't start charities. It takes existing charities and not-for-profit organizations and, if you like, accelerates them through our network of networks. And it's just, I'm really enjoying it, as you can imagine. I currently chair the board of this organization, which is called IT and Law for Good. And my job is to make sure that we have the resources and also we've got the funding to help these charities and these projects along. So look out for this. You're going to see lots of stuff. Now, I did mention to you earlier that my military volunteer career would come in handy again. So today, I'm working very closely with the Royal Corps of Signals, as are the livery company and indeed the BCS. And I'm delighted to say that of course, the Royal Corps of Signals is no longer anything about telecommunications. It's all strictly IT. And it's amazing how many IT companies are giving free consultancy in every which way there is to this extraordinary group of military people. And I know the BCS now, we're working very closely with them to ensure that as soldiers leave the Royal Corps of Signals, they actually have equivalent qualifications that will help them be understood and get new jobs in their second careers. Just in case you thought, just as a finish, you thought that I was a little prone to dressing up, please note, you would be absolutely right. One of my current volunteer roles, which I've done for the last 15 years, is I'm what's called a pikeman on the Lord Mayor's bodyguard. So I'm on one of Her Majesty's guards at all of the great state occasions in the city and at the charity events. I even have to stay fit, can you believe, at my age, because I have to march 5.5 miles every Lord Mayor's show, usually in the rain, of course, whereby if I fall over, the day that I can't pick myself up, I have to leave instantly. But over the 15 years, I have met more kings, queens, and presidents of some countries that I didn't even know existed. And to be honest, some of which I wish I'd never met them. But an incredible privilege and great fun. Right, well, you'll be more than delighted I really have come to the end. I've been hugely honored, of course, to in the past to have been elected as the president of the BCS, and I will, until I drop, continue to try and serve and support our industry because it has done just so much for me and mine. I've been in the right place, as you will have seen, far more times than I ever deserved. And if I'd been a rich man, which I'm not, I would happily have paid for every single day I've spent in the IT industry. And my volunteer roles have really helped me as a child of charity, I hope, to pay back into society and to do my little bit to make IT good for society. Now, for those of you that hate PowerPoint, you can close your eyes now because very quickly, I'm just going to put up a quick reminder of the lessons I learned. Okay, so IT, top professions, social mobility, every child deserves a great education. move around a little bit. You'll mention in your early careers, you should be telling your children, your grandchildren this to find that lucky break. Don't always assume that you can offend your current boss, because you never know where he's going to roll up and be next. And also, don't always assume that you know everything about your colleagues. That was quite a thing. And treat redundancy as the next opportunity. It's rarely the catastrophe that we all think it is. And volunteer again and again and again, just to get the very best out of life. And something I'm shocked very few young people in the IT industry do. They don't understand, to be successful and to move your career forward, you need to network, network, and network. Oh, I've gone too far. Final slide. Always, unlike me, check that corporate culture and the management style before you join a company. Fight against ageism. I'm probably a bit too old to do that now, but and of course, an international career can be just fantastic, but it's very rarely good for your family. I should have been braver sooner and started my own company. And by the way, I've discovered with a vengeance that you'll really actually have sufficient wealth to completely retire. And it's wonderful to help others in their careers, just to try and make the world a better place. And always remember, particularly in my case, just how lucky we are. Thank you so much. If you've managed to stay with this, I congratulate you. I've run way over time, for which I apologize.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. One of your early slides had on it first delivery. And as it went on, I thought, it was almost last delivery, but with a gap between D and livery. So there was a connection between your beginning and your end, if only a distinct one like that. I don't want to get in the way of time. Thank you again. I knew you'd be interesting. I've learned a lot of things that I never knew. And I'm sure when we next meet, we're going to be talking about a lot more things than I thought. And they're great. Thank you for that. The question window has been opened. I'm going to, having said thanks, I'm going to step back now and hand to Roger, and he will conduct the rest of the meeting regarding the Q&A. Thanks very much again.
And I'm hoping we don't have 100 questions.
No, that's Roger's problem now.
Everyone's welcome to submit their questions. It's clear from various comments and that have gone to and fro during the meeting that you've stirred a lot of memories, a lot of discussion about PDP, various models, and people have been telling us how many of these machines they still have and which are still working. But a question Graham Ellis asks you about your time with Prime, and he also was at Prime. But what are your particular likes and dislikes about the Prime hardware and their systems, which were very innovative at the time?
Well, they were very innovative, but of course they weren't open systems. And Primos was great, but my suspicion is that the fact that it wasn't an open system and widely available elsewhere, that probably led to the ultimate demise of us.
Thank you for that one. Other questions that people may have, people thanking you, messages coming in, thanking you for the talk. But a question here from Keith Grimsey. I'm a school governor and would like to get my computing into school. Any suggestions for tackling resistance from the school leadership?
Oh, golly me. Well, you shouldn't actually be having that problem at the moment because, of course, with the coronavirus going around, the absolute lifeblood and godsend of anybody at any level in education is through IT. Every teacher has had to learn how to operate IT, has had to learn how to teach remotely. And I suspect there won't be too many governing boards now that don't realize that in the last months, we've accelerated 5 years, and a lot of the schools should have accelerated at least 10 years.
Thanks for that one. What are your reflections on the impact of the current crisis? Do you think that it will make permanent changes to the way we interact with each other?
I personally think it will. I mean, I'm sitting here in a brand new office for the BCS. There are normally 250 employees here. At this moment, I can see 3. And, certainly in the city of London, I don't actually believe it will ever return to be the same. I have a nephew who he founded a company to deal in viscous oil. Um, he has said nobody in his company will ever go back and work in London because they can run a complete dealing desk in everybody's home. And I'm expecting a lot of empty office space. I think that this will have, although it's done massive damage and massive harm, there will be some extraordinary things that have happened to our industry and accelerated what we do, greatly enhanced our reputation. I mean, the BCS has this IT good for society. Well, my golly, where would society be at the moment without IT? It's never going to be the same again in so many different ways. And I think that this will have given our industry and our profession a good push and made everybody understand just how incredibly important it is in everyday life.
Michael, we're very grateful to you for today's talk. You made history for us. It's the first time we've had a virtual presentation. And as you know, we had well over 100 people in the meeting, and people from around the globe, and a message from Dave Porter living in the USA, and a colleague you were talking to, I think, from Calgary in Canada earlier. It has been a quite extraordinary afternoon in terms of, after just over 30 years of the CCS, the way in which the technology that many of the people in this call and so many other friends and people that you've worked with and that others on this call have worked with have actually made this technology that has enabled us to have this afternoon's meeting. So, Michael, thank you for talking to us, and we are very grateful indeed, and we look forward to seeing everybody at our next meeting, which is in October, and that's a meeting about the development of I've been caught out. It's the development of the Leo computer, I think. But we look forward to that, and we will be publicising that. But Michael, thank you on behalf of everybody this afternoon, and the many people who will also probably look at the recording that will go on YouTube in due course. So thank you very much indeed.
And thank you very much for listening. And please, everybody, stay well and stay safe.